Mm-hmm.
But maybe that's why now we should talk about what are the causes for broken boundaries, why this happens. And as we always say, it goes back to childhood. It always goes back to childhood. And actually, this is a pattern learned from parents usually, or the main caregivers. And it's that moment when a child is learning what is love and what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. So when a child wants something, they usually cry. They usually, express themselves in whatever way they can. And they consider themselves really worthy of love. Like they're tiny little babies, so precious. And they're like, I was born in this world. Of course, everybody loves me. They have no
Mm-hmm.
reason to think otherwise. But then people start treating them and giving them small samples and tastes of conditional love and also inconsistent love. So this, when parents or caregivers or people that are like adults in their lives start saying, oh, I love you because this and that, or you were a good child because this and that, or when they are crying and no one comes to attend for their needs and they're like, what should I do? The child becomes really lost in that sense. So it creates kind of a lack of boundaries or boundaries that are overstepped. And I think it's really important for parents to realize that children do have boundaries and they are not, and they can be broken in very various ways. It can be for an authoritative parent that just do whatever they want and don't consider the child's need or their will or whatever they feel like doing it, and they just impose whatever they think is correct. But also for overprotective parents that don't allow their child to explore and to have this creative space to do whatever they want because they're always under their wings and saying, no, this is dangerous. No, this is this and that. So I think all those things are various things that happen in these very formative years for children that can teach them a lot about not having boundaries, actually.
And I think it's really upsetting to me how children, they can be violated in so many ways. Like in the physical way, some parents and, adults, they pinch their children or, slap them or, all this kind of like physical abuse. And also like emotional. And, every time they do something, anything, there are people screaming at them and saying that they are doing something wrong and you shouldn't and you can't and you're a bad child. And, all this is like very impactful in the way a child is going to grow up, especially like, how do you want a child to understand that something was not supposed to be done if you don't explain, right? If somebody just nowadays, as a grown up, somebody says to you, oh, you cannot do this. You want an explanation, right? Why? Why I can't? It's something new. I want to try. So a child is the same, but in a way bigger way because they don't know many, many things. So everything is like entertaining and curious and they want to know everything about the world. But the people that were supposed to take care of them are like always restricting them and shouting at them. It's like a very unsafe environment for them to explore the world and their existence. And as you said, talking about unconditional love, I think no parents in the entire world can say that they had a completely unconditional love to their children, unfortunately. But it's our broken selves as human beings, right? We're not gods and goddesses like we see in mythology. Or even mythology, they were kind of broken sometimes. But, this idea that someone can be a perfect parent, it doesn't really exist. Because they were broken themselves in the first place. How can they raise a child who is not a little broken as well? It's really challenging.
But I think we can also always learn something because, well, I remember a lot of things when I was young. very clearly my thoughts, my experiences. I think since I was 6 years old, I remember pretty much everything. And it's not because I have a great memory, it's just things that stuck with me. And I remember my thoughts. I was very kind of a grown up in my mind. And I wouldn't understand why grown up people were so irrational and so angry and so, like unstable sometimes. And I promised myself when I become their age, I'm not going to treat children the way they treated me. And this is not because I've been abused or anything like that. Like, my parents never hit us in any way. They just scolded us with words, but they never pinched us or anything like that. But I mean, sometimes I was just like, can you just listen to me? Because you as a child, you also have a mind of your own.
But I think it's not only with our parents, right? It's everyone. People in our teachers, all people, they don't respect children the way they should.
Yeah. And so coming back to the boundary stuff, I think because, for example, if your parents, they were always overstepping your boundaries when you were young, you learn with that it's normal. So, for example, if you have an authoritative parent and you grow up and you face a situation where you have like an authoritative figure in your life, your boss, your professor, this and that, they can do whatever they want. And you're not going to be able to stand up for yourself and say, this is not right. I shouldn't be treated this way, because that's what you internalize. There's a hierarchy system and you're at the bottom. So when you see those things reflected in your later life, you're not going to be able to stand up for yourself.
And sometimes we even think like, oh, my opinion doesn't matter. Nobody ever wanted to consider my opinion. Why now they would? Sometimes you don't think about this in a conscious way, but unconsciously you're thinking, my opinion doesn't matter. Why should I voice it out? People don't want to listen to me. So that's one of the ways that we can have no boundaries, because we believe that our voices doesn't really matter and everyone else has something to say except for us.
I think another way as well that childhood patterns can impact us in later life, I think we talked about is when we were talking about love and all those episodes before Valentine's Day. But sometimes when we talked about attachment styles, actually, but you recognize love from those patterns you had in childhood. So, like we said, if you had conditional love and inconsistent patterns of love, you might reproduce that in your relationships, especially romantic relationships in later life. So those are just like a few examples of how lack of boundaries or boundaries issues can impact your life in all stages of your life, actually.
Mm-hmm.